Legends and Losers, is sponsored by Oracle NetSuite. Learn how to turbocharge your business's growth at netsuite.com/legends. Something special on this episode: the Cocaine Cowboys and the sexy, seedy drug scene of Miami in the 1970s and 80s. We learn the real stories behind movies like Scarface and TV shows like Miami Vice, with the host of NPR's Full Disclosure and the author of this amazing new book called Hotel Scarface, Roben Farzad. All right. Hey ho, let's go. Hello, my legendary friends. Man, am I ever stoked you're joining us for this episode. Legends and Losers has been described as like a box full of chocolates, a magical mystery tour, and something that people tell us is they kind of like not knowing or knowing that they never know where the show's going to go. So we're going to do something completely different on this episode, and it's very exciting. Our guest today is Roben Farzad, and he's a legit big-time journalist. I'll give you sort of his breakdown of his bio in a second, but he's written this amazing book called Hotel Scarface. And Roben grew up in Miami in the 70s, and he became fascinated by what happened in his hometown over that time. And Miami was virtually ungovernable, and it was almost as if it was not part of the United States. And to hear Roben tell it, virtually everybody was on the take in the cocaine business. And so what Roben does in a masterful way in this very detailed nonfiction book that he spent over 20 years writing, he unpacks what really happened, what were the socio-political situations that led to the conditions that created the Scarface type Miami that we know, starting with the Bay of Pigs and from there. So it's a fascinating discussion. He does an amazing reading for us, and it is a magical mystery tour, and I know you're going to love it. And I also need to thank my buddy Dan McGinn, our friend and guest. He was on episode 142. He's a senior editor at Harvard Business Review and the author of the great new book, Psyched Up. And Dan connected me to Roben, and we had this incredible conversation. Now, before we get to Roben, I need to let you know that Heather Clancy and I have a new book coming out soon called Niche Down. And if you would like a free preview teaser of Niche Down, just write us a quick review, take a screenshot of it, and send email to blackhole@legendsandlosers.com, and we will send you a free teaser of our new book coming out in July of 2018, Niche Down. And super excited to have our sponsor NetSuite with us. I was recently at Sweet World in Las Vegas, and we had an extraordinary time. I got to sit down with Bill Walton again, which was great, and I got to sit down with Bernie Williams, which was incredible. And they always throw the best parties at Sweet World. Royal Machines was there again, the band that's like a pickup band with Dave Navarro and a whole bunch of great, mostly 90s rock stars. And just had a blast at Sweet World with about 7,000 of my closest friends. And the reason I love NetSuite is they are on a mission to empower entrepreneurial businesses to grow. And NetSuite's a category king. So they dominate the space that they created, which is being the platform for growth to deal with all of the functions of your business, be it your financials and accounting, your order management, your e-commerce, etc. NetSuite has become the category king in providing a complete business management system in the cloud for growing companies. And some great brands use NetSuite. Asics, the wonderful running shoes. GoPro, the incredible cameras. My tent company, Big Agnes, is actually a NetSuite customer, and Guitar Center, and lots of other cool companies. Now, NetSuite has an incredible offer for Legends and Losers listeners. If you go to netsuite.com/legends right now, you can sign up for a 1-hour growth review with a growth expert from NetSuite. And they'll talk to you about barriers and challenges and opportunities for growth in your business. And so the great thing about growth is that's what we're striving for. We want to build thriving, growing businesses, and growth comes with challenges. And so you can talk to a growth counselor. Think of it as a little bit of a therapy session to talk about how to grow and manage growth with NetSuite. Check it out today at netsuite.com/legends. All right, Roben Farzad. He's the host of NPR's Full Disclosure. He's a special correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. He was also at Business Week for about 9 years, and he started his career early on at Goldman Sachs. He's an extraordinary journalist. He's been on MSNBC, CNN, the PBS NewsHour, CNBC, Dateline NBC, ABC's Good Morning America, the CBS Early Morning Show. And he's written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Miami Herald, and the Boston Globe. And now, here he is, Roben Farzad on Legends and Losers.
I spilled my guts out onto this book. And, the personal genesis of this story, when after writing it, is I realized, in talking to my family that it's deeply personal for me because Miami and I shared a very traumatic 1980. I came here as a young immigrant from Iran, watching Nightline and the hostage crisis with my parents every night, seeing my parents cry, being terrified as they dropped me off at school. I didn't speak the language. And Miami was becoming the murder and cocaine capital of the hemisphere in 1980. And I think looking back at it, 40 years later, I was gravitationally pulled back to 1980 because I feel like I wanted a second hearing on that year. What is it that fascinates me about hearing these stories of pain and kind of murderous chaos and bedlam in 1980? I think that it boils down to that, because otherwise I had no business writing this book. I was a kindergartner at that time, but like for everybody else, I realized I had every business writing it.
So I love these kinds of stories. And to me, this is like a pirate story. This is a modern day pirate story. And what I didn't realize until I read your book, Roben, I had no idea that you have great ways of describing it that I maybe won't get right, but that Miami becomes ungovernable. It's like it's hacked off from the U.S. The CIA won't touch it, and like it's its own thing now. How would you describe it?
It was a failed state. By 1981, when it was the murder capital of America, it was fresh on Ronald Reagan's agenda for his first 100 days. We have a real crisis on our hands. This city absorbed 125,000 Cuban refugees in 6 months. Maybe 20,000 of them were criminals. Maybe 10,000 of them were violent criminals. 1980. And so by the time it absorbed into the bloodstream of Miami until everybody was processed, 1981, it becomes the murder capital of America. You have bodies floating up in marinas. You have people leaving chopped corpses on the side of the highway. You have it appearing on the cover of Time magazine as Paradise Lost and being put on the agenda of Vice President George Bush. This is really a serious thing. And it was, I think, many of the misdeeds of the 60s and 70s that the CIA took and all these other awful misadventures that kind of came back to bite us by the time the 70s crashed and burned into the 80s.
Does it, and if I'm connecting the wrong dots, then, help educate me. But to me, it seemed like there was a direct line back to the Bay of Pigs.
Oh, yeah.
Is that where you think the genesis of then what happens is, or does it go back further?
I wonder how different history would have been if Kennedy had gone back to finish the job at Bay of Pigs, the Bay of Pigs invasion, because what you had after that was all of these orphaned mercenaries and CIA-trained assassins and boatmen and people who were just raring for a rematch, who had nothing to do in the 1960s by the time the theater of focus changes to Vietnam under LBJ. And they turned their skill set into organized crime and bombing each other and smuggling pot and becoming masters of
warriors. Got a war about something, right?
About something. And by the time they see Jimmy Carter is president and he's blowing kisses to Havana, they realize there isn't going to be a rematch of Bay of Pigs, and maybe they should up their game to cocaine. And cocaine, it's potentially peaceful enough if their people aren't warring over it, but no commodity of that. I mean, it's the most lucrative commodity ever known to man. Of course, you mix in sex, you mix in bloodlust, you mix in assassins arriving on the shores of Miami, and you're going to see it
Yeah,
explode
so
in this kind of
this
Roman,
this is the
fall of
part.
Rome way.
This is another set of dots I hadn't quite connected, which is, so you have these essentially mercenaries looking for something to do, right? So they, of course, gravitate towards it. And that's building, this collides with 100,000 Cubans.
125,000 Cubans, maybe 10,000 of them were violent criminals. I mean, you're talking
And
guys.
what was the, just so that, I'm 100% clear, what's the impetus for this massive influx?
You had a crisis where some embassies were stormed in Havana in the spring of 1980, and Miami's watching really carefully, like, wow, they're calling Fidel Castro's bluff. Fidel Castro's going to fall. And Fidel Castro turns around and he says, well, if you have these criminals that these embassies in Havana are not going to release, you know what? Anyone who's not a friend of the revolution is welcome to leave this country. I'm flushing my toilets on the United States. You're scum of the earth. And all these tens of thousands of people cram the port of Mariel waiting to leave. But the wily bastard, rest in peace, he also crams these boats, these shrimp boats, with people from mental institutions. They had hospital bracelets on. Some of his worst assassins, they were in penitentiary boots, that by the time they made it to Miami and INS was checking them out, immigration, they had their tattoos on the inside of their lips, had their weapons of choice. So if it was a knife or it was a gun, if it was a garrote, garrote, I don't even know how it's pronounced. I mean, this guy decided, like, wow, if these people want to embarrass me, the United States can have them. And, Janet Reno, she becomes the attorney general at the turn of the century, realizes that he really pulled one on Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was in no position to say no to these people because, after all, Florida was a swing state, and this was going to be a really close election.
But
What else is?
How could he? I mean, Castro was going to dump them on Florida anyway, right? They're going to
Well,
just show up.
you could send them back to the port of Mariel and repatriate them there. It's Castro's problem. But in addition to the legitimate people who wanted to leave, he made sure that every boat had its share of transvestites, criminals, assassins, mentally ill people. And Miami, as you know, was ill-prepared to accept them at a time when cocaine was, you had all these coke dealers who needed hitmen, who needed odd jobs people, who needed enforcers. Unfortunately, sadly, they called a lot of the Mariel refugees, they called them Dixie cups because they were disposable to these old generation dopers. You'd send them on a run. You'd send them to con somebody because they didn't mind. In the worst case scenario, they'd end up getting 3 square meals in jail.
Incredible. So you have this massive collision of just an influx of immigrants, period, and then some many thousand of whom are criminals and or have something meaningfully wrong with them, with all these mercenaries who are in the cocaine business. And so the other thing, of course, I didn't know until your book, was that everything really, in the most incredible way, centers on the Mutiny Hotel. It's the marketplace, it's the party place, it's the music, it's the everything.
Miami really had no huge nightlife scene, no concentrated nightlife scene to speak of. South Beach back then, if you go back and see Scarface and that illustration of all the elderly people watching the shootout out on Ocean Drive, that's what South Beach was at the turn of that decade. It arrived as a social scene in the late 80s and most of the 90s. So the hottest club, the hottest hotel was the
cut you off, but I remember when Johnny Versace moved there, that was a turning point, was it not?
By then, by 1989, by 1990, 91, South Beach was the hot place to hit.
It was
I remember,
in
high school,
so he was jumping on
it was hot. The Art Deco revival was kind of mid 80s, late 80s. Ian Sprager wanted to come there with Madonna and redo a hotel, the Delano. But this was all pre-South Beach. South Beach was where everybody said grandma and grandpa would go to die. So across the bay from South Beach was Coconut Grove with this Tony Hotel. next door to a recording studio where the Eagles and Joe Walsh and everybody recorded. So, and celebs stayed there. They knew that if you were coming over for a layover in Miami, if you were there to party, all the models, all the Playboy people, all the dopers, all the big money would be at the Mutiny. It was kind of like our Studio 54.
Yeah, the other amazing thing, of course, is that so people go to party, but while that's going on, there's a serious amount of commerce getting done, isn't there, Robin?
I mean, cocaine was a huge amount of money, as I've said a million times. Can you imagine the Federal Reserve branch of Miami had a $5 billion surplus in 1980? That's more than all the other regional Federal Reserve banks. I mean, San Francisco, Richmond, New York combined. So Miami was just swimming in all this hot cash from cocaine. Of course, if you can procure a kilo wholesale, from the Andes for a couple $1,000s, sell it for $50,000 pure on the street in Miami. But of course, it's not going to be pure. You're going to cut it with baby laxative or powdered milk. And by the time it makes its way down the food chain of plastic baggies and speedballs and everything, it's worth $600,000. What are you going to do with all that cash? You're going to buy horses, you're going to buy cars, you're going to buy apartments, and you're going to literally blow it down the drain at the Mutiny on Dom Perignon because you want to telegraph to the world that money is no object to me. And in that sense, it was the great equalizer for a lot of these Cuban immigrants who've been champing at the bit for 20 years. They're suddenly throwing around all this money. They're partying with Stevie Nicks. They have Playboy playmates, in their tubs with them at the Mutiny. I mean, this country's great, even though they want to get the heck out.
They have a hot tub full of Dom.
Right. Which didn't really serve a purpose. The guy who tried it for the first time, who jumped in, he says he sizzled his nads. It's not a very comfortable thing. But it was more what you telegraph to people that, look, I can literally pour tens of thousands of dollars down a drain.
And am I remembering this right? That the Mutiny then becomes the number one seller of Dom on the planet for a while?
Yeah, by 1980, the distributors visited in disbelief. They heard that all these other, on the Eastern Seaboard, all these other hotels and clubs were complaining or kind of tipping them off that they were making quite a lot in the secondary market. The Mutiny would fly its private jet at the last minute ahead of big weekends and clean out like a place in Hilton Head of all of its DOMs. So when the distributor learned of it, of course, it shows up there. And it realized it had cleared out a suite on the first floor and turned it into a walk-in cooler just for Dom. I mean, it was really crazy. Can you imagine?
Fantastic.
Can you imagine blowing $30,000 on Dom? And the cute thing is that the room service guys were in it too. When they were asked to fill up one of these tubs ahead of a big, bender or orgy or big cocaine bash, of course they'd keep a stash of cheap bubbly in the back and, to pocket a lot of the money themselves. This is such an ecosystem of skimming, of taking a vig. It was beautiful.
Now, Robin, would you mind doing a reading for me?
Sure. What would you like me to read?
Oh, wow. Let's see. It's a little dark in here. Yeah, why don't you how about the beginning of chapter 2, Monkey in the Middle, because there's so many characters in this book, but this is a big character. Would that be safe to say?
Yeah, Monkey Morales was the spirit animal of this book. He's been dead for 35 years, but he still haunts Miami and very much this book. So yeah, do you want me to read Monkey in the Middle?
Yeah, that would be awesome.
All right. Owning a fantasy land for outlaws in the hellscape that was cocaine Miami had hardly been in the cards for New Jersey-born Burton Goldberg when the 40-year-old developer set his sights on Coconut Grove in the mid-1960s. True, his father part-owned Midtown Manhattan's Navarro Hotel, where mafiosi like Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano had held court in the 1950s. But Goldberg is adamant that he had, quote, absolutely nothing to do with the Navarro, and bristles at any suggestion of mob ties. Coconut Grove, founded in the mid-19th century as Coconut, C-O-C-O-A-N-U-T Grove, and annexed by the city of Miami in 1925, was an offbeat bohemian village whose residents left their doors open and allowed strangers to pluck mangoes off their trees. In 1882, its Bayview House, later renamed the Peacock Inn, became the first hotel on the South Florida mainland below Palm Beach. Up until its turn-of-the-century conversion into a school, the inn was a hub for Miami's first community organizers. The Great Hurricane of 1926 obliterated Coconut Grove and hit the reset button on the rest of Miami. A parcel of land overlooking the water at the corner of South Bayshore Drive and McFarland Road used to house the Peacock Inn's general store. In 1966, Burton Goldberg bought the plot from its eventual inheritor, a New England Christian Scientist. By then, Coconut Grove was Miami's hippie central. Women with hairy armpits sun topless in the park by the marina. Its Dinner Key Auditorium is where Doors frontman Jim Morrison infamously exposed himself to a sellout crowd. The joke in the Grove's head shops and incense bodegas was that the most violent thing in these parts were the wild roosters that chased the mailmen. The neighborhood was a sleepy escape from the mayhem a few miles away. Downtown Miami and Little Havana were getting shot up and bombed by characters like Ricardo Morales. 1960s South Florida played host to the mob's internecine bookie wars, while thousands of Cuban exiles in and around Miami channeled their testosterone into what they assumed would be a chance to take out Fidel Castro and reclaim Cuba. Miami hosted dozens of CIA-run paramilitary camps and dummy companies that could procure and ship any material at moment's notice. Swift boats, demolition, underwater sabotage, machine guns, plastic explosives, and recoilless rifles. Cuban men and adolescents alike were steeped in the agency's dark arts of regime change. Cuban exiles and the American mafia had a shared history. During the pre-revolutionary dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista, Cuba was the playground of the mob, a sort of Vegas in the Caribbean. Overlords like Luciano Lansky and Florida-based Santo Traficante owned many of Havana's casino resorts. They flew and cruised into the island to dine on manatee and flamingo steaks. Whore with every shape, size, and color of chica. Buy cops and judges and watch live sex shows that would have gotten them arrested in the States. It was hedonism with no consequences, as long as you paid off the right people. In 1959, when Fidel Castro wrested control of Cuba, he nationalized the resorts and had their slot machines smashed in the streets. During the ensuing purge, Ricardo Morales, a 20-year-old law school student, signed up for Castro's secret police. Al pared, to the wall! The Cuban street bayed for more bodies to be bought before the firing squads. The old regime's cronies, enforcers, and accused traitors were dragged out and stood up against pockmarked walls. Some of the condemned were drained of their blood, syringe after syringe, until they were about to pass out. The better to use fewer precious bullets in finishing them off. Morales quickly grew disenchanted with the secret police and wanted out of Castro's Cuba. He might also have been flipped by the CIA, which had assets on the ground in Havana, just as Fidel Castro had moles up in Miami. Either way, South Florida echo-chambered with rumors that the White House would soon take out Castro, much as it had snuffed out other third world regimes that it didn't like. Fathers, sons, and brothers in Miami's exile community disappeared for days on end into training camps in the Everglades and to run drills miles off the coast. Something was coming down the pike. I had to choose between Moscow and Washington, Morales later quipped. In 1960, he finally defected through the Brazilian embassy and escaped to South Florida. In Miami, Morales signed up for Operation 40, an assassination group that targeted Castro loyalists and assets in Cuba and abroad. In the early 1960s, Miami's CIA branch, stocked with exiles, case agents, front companies, munitions, and real estate, grew into the world's biggest. Morales' aunt and 7-year-old niece lived in a small apartment in Little Havana, just west of downtown Miami. An overgrown mango tree touched the bedroom window. Inside, under the bed, Morales left a bomb and a couple of guns with instructions that if he ever came running through the apartment, whoever was at home had to race to the bedroom, throw him the guns, and escape down the mango tree. The last one out had to pull the pin on the bomb. His aunt constantly rehearsed the drill with his niece, Lynette. "I still see that thing under the bed," she said. "Let me tell you, it was not a small bomb." It is hilarious to think back on it, and then you just shake your head. But Miami's exiles' belief that taking back Cuba was fait accompli was smashed in April of 1961, when Castro's forces thwarted Brigade 2506. The 1,400 CIA-trained paramilitaries, most of them South Florida exiles, who attempted to invade Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. It wasn't even close. The Kennedy administration, which inherited the top-secret invasion from Dwight Eisenhower's CIA, opted not to provide air reinforcements. The anti-Castro brigadesmen, Cuba's would-be liberatores, who weren't killed or repelled out to sea, were taken prisoner. News of which put Miami in a state of shock and mourning. The mayor went on television to plead in Spanish. We urge the Cuban colony exiles that are here to remain calm and composed, and we pray to God that Cuba's freedom will flourish from the blood that is being shed. It was an all-around catastrophe for Washington. Fidel Castro thumped his chest and inspired leftists the world over. Cuban Americans seethed at President Kennedy for abandoning their men, and Havana was now blowing kisses to Soviet Russia. To pile on the insult, Castro leveraged more than 1,100 Bay of Pigs captives to shake down the U.S. for $53 million in cash, food, and medical supplies, all of which were critical to the young regime's survival. The Bay of Pigs was a coup for Fidel Castro. Even so, most everyone in Miami operated under the assumption that there would be a rematch. Kennedy himself came to Miami's Orange Bowl in late 1962 to assure returning prisoners that Brigade 2506 Flange would be returned to Havana. The CIA maintained a campaign of secret exile-led raids. In 1963, Morales regaled the Miami Herald with the story of how he and 9 fellow exiles in 2 fast boats nearly destroyed a refinery on the coast of Cuba. He was desperate to see more action and crushed when the CIA under President LBJ wound down its clandestine campaign against Castro. A year later, a restless Morales reluctantly agreed to be shipped to the Belgian Congo, where he and a top-secret brigade of Cuban exiles battled leftist rebels allied with Soviet-trained Cuban troops. Many of the Congolese soldiers were armed with nothing more than spears, having been brainwashed by witch doctors. The Cuban-American mercenaries had such an easy time mowing them down that Morales' comrades compared their weapons to fire hoses. Morales took a bullet to the spine but kept shooting. For much of this commando tour, a terrified little Congolese girl latched onto his shoulders and slept in his arms at night. The memory would forever haunt the father of 4. In 1965, Morales returned to Miami, disillusioned and traumatized. So much for the rematch against Fidel Castro. Kennedy was dead and the Vietnam War was now front and center in the Cold War. South Florida, meanwhile, still teemed with spies, double agents, arms smugglers, mafia men, and retired dictators, providing no shortage of gigs for orphan mercenaries. Morales took a job parking cars at a mob-owned steakhouse in Miami Beach and let it be known that this is where he kept office hours and solicited contract work. 15 miles downtown the coastline in Coconut Grove, in 1967, Burton Goldberg hired a crane to park a houseboat on the bend of South Bayshore Drive. The vessel would serve as a quirky pre-construction sales office for his forthcoming building, Sailboat Bay. This was while Ricardo Morales, acting as a freelance bomber, scuba dived up to the back of a mobster's house in Miami Beach. A rival wanted the homeowner off so he could move in on his wife, a Playboy bunny. It turned out that the gangster's wife and 4 children were sleeping inside when a pair of bombs ripped apart the carport. All survived. Maybe Morales wanted it this way. Who knows? The Miami Herald ran a bombing box score of recent explosions, perpetrators still at large. Morales, it turned out, was responsible for at least half of the incidents, including the dynamiting of a Miami cop's front lawn and the double bombing of a numbers racket in South Beach. In another contract hit, Morales shot a convicted jewel hustler in the face. The victim survived and Monkey was never charged. Later in 1967, for reasons unknown, Morales pulled up to a Cuban exile in broad Little Havana daylight and sprayed him with 17 rounds from a silencer-equipped 45 caliber M3 submachine gun. Again, the victim somehow managed to live. He never pressed charges. Morales bragged about the episode as, quote, just another day at the office. In 1968, Morales bombed a firm that forwarded food and medicine to Cuba. This time, however, police found his fingerprints on C4 explosive. In his house, they seized the bomb and detonator. Finally arrested, the Monkey was facing serious time. But the wily Morales promised the FBI an even bigger catch. The terrorist who had just attempted to attack a Polish freighter at the port of Miami with a shoulder-held bazooka. The shell dented the ship's hull, and the State Department had to issue an official apology to Communist Poland. Morales infiltrated the gang, supplying the men and women with phony dynamite as the FBI recorded his conversations with the ringleaders. He testified against the culprits and won his freedom. Quote, chubby-cheeked Morales, as the front page story in the Miami Herald described him, testified that he didn't ask to get paid for his services to the FBI, nor did he get any promises for his undercover work. He did, however, now have an FBI bodyguard shadowing him. Morales, 29, was a marked man in Miami, having betrayed nearly a dozen fellow exiles who were widely regarded as freedom fighters for targeting that freighter. Whispers echoed that he was still in the employ of Fidel Castro. Down in Coconut Grove, Burton Goldberg cut the ribbon on his 12-story sailboat bay, billed as the Grove's first high-rise apartment. He touted how residents would be privy to a panorama of security cameras that transmitted various live angles to an in-house TV channel. Sailboat Bay's aesthetic was decidedly white and white collar. The attorney who represented Linda Lovelace, star of the porn Deep Throat, much of which was shot in a house around the corner, kept an office upstairs. Earl Smalley, the majority owner of the league-dominating Miami Dolphins, scored a suite overlooking the pool. By his bed was a pink pneumatic fuck bench that beach babes could saddle up on after long days on his speedboat, which was docked in adjacent Dinner Key Marina. In late 1971, Goldberg opened a small club and restaurant atop the lobby. He called it the Mutiny. He also wanted to convert Sailboat Bay's mixed apartment and office concept into a boutique hotel called the Mutiny at Sailboat Bay. Quote, "I'd call it the sex hotel if I could," he said. "This is all about the sexual revolution, the pill, boy meet girls. I wanted swingers, but it had to be upscale and classy." Goldberg's timing could not have been better. The Republican nominating convention was coming back to Miami Beach. Richard Nixon's best friend, banker Bebe Rebozo, often wined and dined guests at the Mutiny while his yacht was out front. E. Howard Hunt, the GOP operative who was chief political officer for the CIA when Castro rose to power, lived in Coconut Grove and drank at the Mutiny's bar. Baron Joseph Seppi de Bixi de Brogni, the internationally renowned aristocrat, nude sculptor, and ladies' man, was bringing buttes and European royalty to Coconut Grove. The Super Bowl and perfect season-bound Miami Dolphins were drawing national press. All sorts of media and sports VIPs flocked to the Mutiny. Best of all for Burton Goldberg, two massive commodity booms were about to pack Miami with free-spending horn dogs. For starters, the global oil shock of 73 gave rise to the era of the Dame Dos, Spanish for give me two. Rich Venezuelans who'd flocked to Miami to strip shelves bare, spend big on fine food and wines, and luxuriate at resorts. Also known as the fat cows of Caracas, these men would often fly in with their families in the morning, leave their planes at Miami International, and send their wives and daughters to shop at Dadeland Mall, all while they relaxed, wined, dined, and fornicated at the Mutiny. They'd all reunite in the evening at Miami International Airport to fly back to South America. At the same time, thousands of Miami's Cuban exiles dived headlong into smuggling marijuana. After all, this was the 1970s. Everyone in Miami wanted good weed, and no one knew how to smuggle it into the country better than South Florida Cubans, who had spent a decade and a half memorizing every nook and cranny of the state coastline, with help from the CIA. Adding urgency to their career pivot, in 1975, the government of the Bahamas banned U.S. fishermen from its waters on the justification that it needed to defend lobster from overexploitation by Florida trappers. This gave the nation's corrupt government more nationalistic cred, i.e., our seafood is our national endowment, not to be plundered by the richest country on the planet. Miami's seafood industry was overwhelmingly Cuban. Boat captains and laborers were at most a degree of separation from somebody who had served at the Bay of Pigs. Men who had by now sublimated their CIA training to storm Cuba into smuggling marijuana up and down the coast of Florida. Some of these exiles made over 100, 200, 300 missions to Cuba, going against the most heavily patrolled coast that I've ever heard of, explained the commando who had trained many of them. These people came out knowing how you do it, and they found it absolutely child's play when they started with drug smuggling over here, because U.S. law enforcement didn't have that kind of defense. They didn't even need most of their expertise. Accordingly, one Jose Medardo Alvaro Cruz, a charismatic brigade veteran, became known as the King of the River for being connected to just about every Cuban fisherman and vessel docked along the Miami River. His value proposition to the men and their crews was straightforward. They no longer had to sully their hands on lobster traps, bycatch, and fish guts. They can now become rich smuggling in neatly packed bales of marijuana, dubbed square groupers, off giant ships Alvaro was anchoring miles off the coast. The new thinking: why just sit around and go poor when there were easy marijuana millions to be made? Look, hermano, Fidel Castro took your wealth and Washington let him keep it. Bay of Pigs 2 wasn't happening anytime soon. Surely not under a post-Watergate Democratic president who would be in no mood to prioritize Havana. No, fuck that. It was time to get paid. Not that Miami's reefer madness was solely supplied by Cuban smugglers. Mutiny waitress Deb Kendrick moonlighted as an unlikely smuggler for the Black Tunas, a marijuana gang run by two Jewish peddlers from Philadelphia. Loaded padlock sedans would get delivered to her, fresh off the barge on the Miami River, ready to be driven up the East Coast for delivery to various doormen on Manhattan's Upper East Side. I was scared to death, said the Michigan native. The car stunk. I stunk. I was too terrified to stop. But blonde, 105 pounds, and 5'1", she didn't exactly fit the profile of a drug smuggler.
It's so great. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you.
Uh, there's a line I wrote down. I want to make sure I got it right. Sit around getting poor. They didn't want to just sit around getting poor. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I mean, sit around getting poor. No, what was it? No, sit around waiting for the rematch.
Yeah, once it became clear the rematch wasn't going to happen, you had a line in there that said there was no point of just sitting around getting poor or something to that effect. I thought it was great anyway.
Yeah, no, fuck that. It was time to get paid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Fidel Castro took your wealth and Washington let him keep it. This was a bunch of different cross currents had to happen for our cocaine tragedy. And one of the bigger stories was that really the CIA came back for seconds in the 1980s with the whole Iran-Contra crisis. A critical leg of that was looking the other way while Miami cocaine smugglers, they shipped cocaine up to Miami and the planes went back with arms for the Contras. And if you look at the John Kerry report and the Oliver North testimony and everything, the CIA really looked the other way while this stuff was happening, while Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan had declared a war on drugs. So it was really cynical stuff that I had learned.
Yeah, you unpack things that feel maybe sinister is too strong of a word, but certainly there's, to maybe put it more kindly, a lot of sleight of hand going on. And
yeah.
And it's not so much what I say, it's what I do. There's are you a scuba diver by chance, Robin?
No.
Well, there's a scuba diving expression that says you can't suck and blow at the same time. Right? And so policy-wise, it's funny how our country and many others.
And the joke in Miami in the 1980s was that every cocaine dealer that was busted would claim he was working for the CIA. So that became, it was so cliche at one point. Like, I'm a freedom fighter. No, I'm not a smuggler. I'm doing this for tactical reasons,
But you also paint a picture of a town where a lot of people are on the take. The cops are on the take, and elected officials are on the take, and people who grant licenses for various things. Like it just, that's the picture that I'm left with, is sort of everybody's taken a little slice.
No different in any sort of mafia circumstance. This is just a mob with a tremendous amount of money. If you start at the 1980 inception with a $5 billion cash surplus, yes, any cop's palms could be greased. It was a huge problem with official rot in Miami. I mean, all these dopers that admitted to me that they paid off cops, people in evidence lockers to run magnets over tapes, judges who instruct them to deliver Publix grocery bags with cash in them. I mean, when you have public servants making $25,000, $30,000 a year, a judge making $40,000 a year, and a cocaine dealer clearing that much on a kilo of cocaine, of course, it's almost inevitable that money is going to find unscrupulous people.
Yeah, and so the thing that just, and I go back to it because I think it's so incredible, is that you paint this picture of, here's this part of the United States that is essentially a gangster anarchy.
Yeah, I mean, they used to say, the joke used to be, you should visit Miami. It's unusually close to the United States. It's very conveniently close to the United States. It's always kind of, it's been a bootlegger's paradise. It's been a land of kind of Ponzi schemers and get rich quick people and mobsters, certainly in the 1920s, after Havana fell to Fidel Castro. And to this day, it retains its reputation as being, if not the money laundering capital of America, then definitely the hot money capital of America. I mean, go look at the documentary Cocaine Cowboys. Those guys wrote the intros to the book. What kind of industry do you have fundamentally in Miami otherwise? Tourism? It's not this Fortune 500 bastion. I mean, there's a decent ad firm, Crispin Porter, that was there. But what do? We have cruise ships. We have cocaine. We have condominiums that Central American dictators park their money in.
What sounds like paradise.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah,
selling a
but the
dream.
fact
It's
that it
selling a
got to
dream.
such a place where it was essentially completely ungovernable. And so what sort of um take me through sort of what gets us to the Miami that we know today that's seems, at least on the surface, you tell me, a little more civil than that.
Well, I would posit that a lot of that skyline was built by cocaine indirectly. Money that built banks, that went into construction loans, that has money that, per kilo that has been laundered or thrice removed from that original kilo that fell into receivership. Um, it's absolutely unrecognizable today if you go to Miami, even from 10 years ago, especially from 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. The skyline is just teeming. It's crazy.
And cocaine
And
built that skyline.
I would say that it did because cocaine then went into the savings and loan crisis. A lot of these banks that failed. We illustrated with the victors of the mutiny, the biggest cocaine dealers in Miami history, Willie and Sal, Los Muchachos, just take up a good third of the book. They were smart enough to realize that it wasn't just about selling cocaine. It was about parking that money somewhere, laundering it, using Panama as a place to build front companies, buying, custom speedboat building operations all up and down Florida, buying assets abroad, buying them through Panamanian banks. I mean,
Shell companies and all of that stuff, right?
shell companies, and they were big buyers. I didn't have this in the book, but bull semen, that was a very big thing. They realized that
What?
was bull semen, which was, I mean, if you were into the bullfighting realm, and you could market the semen, the seed of a very powerful bull that was prolific in the bullfighting ring, or
What?
the rodeo.
I mean, I gotta ask, what would one do after with the semen after one purchased it?
It's just a store of value. It's frozen, and there's a fungible market for it in Texas and Oklahoma and in Mexico and in Juarez and in areas that have a kind of a, not just bullfighting or rodeo culture. Uh, these guys parked a lot of money, and they had land, an airstrip in Central Florida in kind of redneck country, and they had horses. Horses were great because they, you know, there was an element of kind of racing them. There was a competitive spirit. You could deduct all of the feed and all of the upkeep. It was such a ridiculous commodity, cocaine, that you had to be Fortune 500 like in kind of getting a CFO apparatus to manage it. You couldn't just open up a pizzeria and launder a couple $100.
So the level of detail and sophistication for creating these networks of companies to park all this cash.
And look how long it took the feds to ultimately keep up with that. I mean, they finally nabbed Willie and Sal in October of 1991. This case went to trial in 1995 after several witnesses were executed, and that jury was bought. And so the government retried them again. What was it in 2002, at the turn of the century? Oddly enough, under Attorney General Janet Reno, who was the state attorney who had pursued them the first time around.
You
And it
can't
took
make this shit up.
No, you can't make this shit up. And then the editor, I just remember the editor is like, "Are you making this up?" I was like, "No, here's the proof. I'll give you, line it up one to one." There's definitely something almost vortex-like about this address, that it drew in all these people who would end up in the news again. I mean, the cop who was pursuing all the dopers ends up becoming the first Cuban chief of police in Miami. Willie and Sal become the biggest dopers in Miami history. The architects of the skyline, Steve Ross, the owner of the Dolphins, and George Perez were pals who had a table together. It's like it was the ooze that exploded, Miami out of this hotel, out of this address in 1979.
All of it's going down at the Mutiny.
All of it.
It's so outrageous, and everybody knows about Studio 54. I didn't know about this, and I'm a huge Scarface fan. And listen, Roben, I will admit it. At the time, not recently, I saw more than one episode of Miami Vice.
I love it.
But I had no idea the scope of it.
Yeah, and you talk about art imitating life. De Palma and Pacino tried to film scenes of Scarface at the Mutiny. They stayed there the bigger subtext of this is Miami wanted no part of Scarface after what we talked about earlier in 1980 with all these criminals coming. Like, they needed that publicity like a bullet in the head.
Yeah.
And by the time Miami Vice shows up in 83, 84, they're all over the mutiny. In fact, Tubbs, Philip Michael Thomas,
Those
falls in
guys
love
are
with
hanging out there, right?
He buys a floor. He invests in a company called Machiavelli that would, doll up a Pontiac then. And he'd park his Machiavelli, his purple Machiavelli out front. And he'd party with the late Eagle Glenn Fry, who was also a star in the first or second season of Miami Vice. I mean, and who recorded Next Door. I mean, I could not, the hardest part was keeping this book to kind of kilo size, 320 pages. The nice
It's
thing
so
is that
outrageous.
we have the option of a TV treatment coming up. There was, we're very fortunate within the first month of the book to get picked up by Stone Village Productions to seek a premium limited cable series. And that's my dream, because so much had to be left on the cutting room floor.
Well, yeah, and the amazing thing today, and it's why I love podcasting, is so many of the constraints are gone. And so many things are possible at price points, that you couldn't think of in the past. And so, yeah, you could take this work and, I mean, I don't know, you tell me how many episodes this could be, but, and do something much more compelling than a movie with it, is I guess my point.
Yeah. And, if I had my brothers, if the book publishing industry was a little more flexible when I had crossed paths with it initially, I think I would have started this as a This American Life series and then parlayed that into a straight up book and cable series. I think, I did have many of these characters on my podcast, and I just think it conveys so much better in kind of spoken word. And you mix in music and some of the atmospherics. It's just much more fascinating to listen to.
It's interesting that you say that, and I'm biased. I think podcasting is incredible because we have this free range medium to have a real dialogue about something. I was listening to, you'll forgive me for forgetting exactly when it came out, but the episode of your show about HBR. I don't know,
yeah.
Maybe
Yeah,
6 months ago or a year ago.
Sure.
But, I'm a huge HBR fan. And, of course, we got connected through Dan, and he's been incredibly kind to me. But the thing about that is, my point about that is that, they're doing so well now, like better than they ever have, right? And so there's this sort of pull towards, I think, quality that stands out, and by they're able to do it across different mediums, right? So they have a podcast and they do video, and of course they have tons of published content, and of course the book itself, and so they have this huge playground to play with that traditionally media companies haven't played with, I guess is my point.
No. Yeah, and I remember I wanted to get Adi Ignatius on that show because when I was in business school, I went to interview with him at Time Magazine. My dream job was at Time Magazine, and what he did was he had me put my hand out. This was circa 2004, and he put an issue of Time on my hand. He goes, "We have no ad pages. Like, there's nothing going on here, son. Go out and sow your oats. And I mean, you think about it now, it's just a shell of even what it was back then.
It's funny you say that. Just before we began, I picked up the mail, and the current copy of Rolling Stone is in my mailbox. And I said to my wife, Carrie, I said, look at this thing. I mean, I think the Costco fucking flyer is bigger than this thing.
Bigger than this, yeah.
Right? And it's so sad. It's fucking Rolling Stone. Yeah.
I just remember Rolling Stone, man. My friend Ross Turian was the first kid on the block to have cable TV, and his sister Dana was so cool because he was a bit of a latchkey kid, and we'd go there after school and watch MTV, and his sister had all of these Rolling Stone magazines, and I just felt so, as a new kid from Iran, it was such a daring thing to do, and there was heft to these magazines, and there was big size pages. I mean, it was definitely a glorious time, and now but the beautiful thing is that the obverse of that is that anybody with a great voice or a great idea, the barriers to entry, as you know, are lower than they've ever been.
I mean, look at what we're up to, right? I mean, it's incredible, and so I think that's very, very powerful. And to your point, long form, I like to think of it as free range dialogue.
Right. It's true. It's
Now,
true. There are still some people, though, I think, like, Terry Gross, um, Charlie Rose, until he was felled recently. I mean, people like, if your book appears on those shows,
boy,
suddenly you
don't you
see a
feel like
substantial uptick.
the Charlie Rose type stuff, that particularly with a guy like Charlie Rose, for me, Louis C.K., there's been a handful of these guys. Of course, fucking House of Cards,
Kevin Spacey, yeah.
Kevin Spacey, and of course, originally Bill Cosby. Holy
Bill Cosby,
shit!
yeah.
When that came out, that was really the beginning. People say it was Weinstein. For me, it was really
That was
Cosby.
Bill Cosby, yeah.
But like, this is horrible on so many levels, right? But the problem is it wrecks all the work, kind of, right? Like, I don't know that I can watch it, these comedians anymore, or like, can I watch The Usual Suspects anymore? I don't know. And so it's horrible what they did. And then for us who like their work, it's horrible that A, we're pissed at them for what they did and the people they hurt, and B, we're doubly pissed because now we can't enjoy the shit anymore.
You can, however, get a Cosby Show box set for like $3 on Amazon.
But yeah, I hear your point, and it's interesting. Those produced shows have a place. I mean, how can you not love Fresh Air? How can you not love Freakonomics? And these guys do an incredible job, and so there's absolutely a place for that. I just happen to be drawn to the more free range dialogue.
It is so free range. It's unbelievable. I mean, and you know what? What's so liberating is I have a 2012 model car, and what makes everyone feel like a king is a Bluetooth connection that syncs seamlessly with your smartphone. I mean, you could just stream anything from Spotify, anything from SoundCloud, from NPR One. I mean, your phone is the world's radio. That's the beautiful thing. And I like you, have heard from people in Switzerland, in Nigeria, in New Zealand, in South America, in my native Iran. It's not that hard to get through on a podcast. So it's really, really, really fulfilling.
Yeah, I think it's exciting. And I think we're really just in the beginning of this medium, because I think for every Kardashian tweet, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right?
It's true.
And I don't want to have a political discussion, but it feels like on all sides, the political inauthentic landslide of intergalactic bullshit is escalating at rapid speeds, right? And so
true.
And in the corporate world, we had CEO of Splunk, Doug Merritt, on Legends and Losers, and Splunk's a $12 billion company. And you just don't hear CEOs have open, honest, authentic conversations. No. They're completely controlled by lawyers and
the publicists and compliance people. Yeah.
Right. And so I guess my point is, we get fed a bunch of bullshit. Like, you remember when Apple got caught for fucking us on the batteries?
Right.
And they feed us this bullshit. And we all know, we all know what you were doing.
What you're doing.
You're lying. And then, of course, there's VW and Wells Fargo and all of it. Anyway, so it just feels like to me, on one level, we're like surrounded with all of that. But that we have on a different level, we got guys like you writing books like this, right? We got HBR doing better than they ever have before. You got, all these incredible podcasts. I mean, I'm addicted to probably 20 podcasts, right? How do you get paid?
How do you get paid?
I don't get paid. I'm retired. I'm on a fixed income. No, my book came out in June of 2016, and I retired. Yeah, and so I do a teeny, eeny, weeny little bit of work with a few companies from time to time. So Legends and Losers is a passion project. There's no monetization plan. It's a cost center.
It's a cost center. I've been a cost center my entire career in journalism. That's the one thing. I don't mean to take this into Wonkistan, but it'd be nice for once in my life to be kind of paid for my central skill, to not have to have a side hustle to subsidize the
Wonkistan.
passion, you know?
Yeah, that is interesting. And to just drill the podcast point home, and where we were in the beginning of the conversation, create your own fucking platform, right? If you can go create your own platform, then what are they going to do? Neen or nanner?
It's true.
And that's kind of how I feel. And look, I'm just doing this for fun and to have these amazing conversations with guys like you, and hopefully the world listens. And look, I'd be lying if I didn't say I was, wanted to do well. But it's a passion project, and as it grows, the funny thing is, there is part of me that the punk rock warrior in me, Roben, there is a neener nana that goes, yeah, hey, y'all thought I was a moron, eh?
No, that's great. It was a big turning point for my podcast was I'm a huge Yes fan. The band Yes.
Yeah.
And when their bassist passed away a couple years ago, I just wanted to call the guitarist. He lives in SoCal now. He does motion picture soundtracks, Trevor Rabin, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm game. When would you like to do it? Would you like to Skype?" Bam, like right then and there. And I do something that just went massively viral that day. I get to interview guitarists who I grew up listening to, and it was so flat and it was so linear, and I didn't have to kiss the ring of a public radio station or go through compliance people. It was just so great.
Yeah,
that kind of stuff can happen. You can reach out and touch someone.
Yeah, and I thought no one's going to come on this fucking show, and very few people are probably going to listen, because it's just so different, but we found our audience, or they found us, or a little bit of both, and it's great. And the other thing that's really cool, I don't know if you feel this way about your show, our audience engages with me a lot, and I work my ass off to engage back. I know some of it slips through the cracks, but I try to deal, because I didn't know it would be fun. I didn't know it would be great.
Yeah, no, that you're absolutely right. Look, if nothing else, I mean, people have considered this book. They go through the grunt work of finding my email or direct message or my podcast link, and they share something with me. It's the rush kind of never fades off for me. It's kind of like whenever I deposit a check with my phone, I feel like George Jetson. Whenever whenever a listener or a reader of my book gets in touch, it never gets old for me.
I feel like George Jetson when I go to the airport and I hand them my Star Trek communicator and they let me get on the plane.
They let you get on the plane, yeah.
Right? That blows my
right.
fucking mind every time. Like, wow.
It should.
that like, I haven't, and actually I find, I don't know if this is true for you, Roben, the older I get, the more this is true for me. I was not amazed about that stuff as a young man. I hustle, go, build, do my thing, all that. Now I have time, more time to think and reflect and stuff. And so shit like that, I go, wow, this is incredible Star Trek shit we got going on right here.
You see the new iPhone, you unlock it with your face. It's unbelievable to me.
I know, it's kind of freaked me out.
Got rid of the home button. It kind of freaked me.
Well, yeah, and like Ancestry.com, yeah, those guys, Ancestry.com and 23andMe. Have you done that stuff?
I saw the ad today. I want to do the 30% off thing and find out I'm related to Genghis Khan.
See, that shit freaks me out because you of course, the only way this works is they own your DNA, right?
I know, Jesus Christ.
Right, because it's a network, right? And it doesn't work if everybody says, yeah, I want my results, but you can't have my DNA. Well, then the whole thing doesn't work, right? I understand, but and now they own your DNA. Now, I don't know why I think that's weird, and I don't want to do that. There's no, I won't even pretend that there's some kind of analytical thought process I've come through that says, no, this is a bad thing. But
No, it
I
is
just don't
freaky.
want to do that.
Have you seen this video recently? The Chinese can identify faces with closed circuit television. I mean, it's just privacy is just dwindling. I mean, I thought I could live
Well,
with
we
it when I
have
was in New
devices
York
in our
or
houses that listen to everything we say. That's what the
sure,
device
sure,
does.
yeah,
That's what it does.
I know.
Wow. And you paid for it. Wow.
Yeah. Oh,
Right?
geez.
I mean, you read 1984. You're a learned person.
Yeah, yeah. It's absolutely terrifying. Or was it Fahrenheit 451 or 1984 where they had the big flat screen reality show televisions on the wall that would just like the opiate of the masses? I think it was Fahrenheit 451, and it's pretty much to the point if you're watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians today. So
Yeah, don't get me started on them. Other than
no, I'll try not to.
I I I hate that we live in a world where there's no way you can't not you have to know them. You have to know who they are. There's no possible way. I mean, I don't know how you could live in our modern world and not know who those fucking assholes are.
Oh, geez. Kids are going to have to read about it in history books. I mean, think about the way we think back to 1901, and they'll be talking about 2002, 2003 like that, you know?
Yeah. Or, Marilyn Monroe or
Oh,
Jane
yeah.
Mansfield. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Give me a break. This is what we got?
This
Terrible.
is what we
We get an F. Where's Jane Mansfield when you need her?
Oh, gosh.
All right, Robin. Well, hey, is there? This has been awesome. You're awesome. Is there anything else before we kick out of this wave?
No, I'm just really grateful to you. The book's link is hotelscarface.com. You can read an excerpt, send me comments. If you want an autographed copy, I do that through Fountain Bookstore, and I personalize them. Again, I'm just grateful to anybody who reads this book. It's such an intensely competitive. I'm going up against Stranger Things and especially now this Fire and Fury book, which has kind of blown everything out of the water.
Yeah, but this is a completely different thing. I mean, this is the book you really. I mean, and look, I don't want to tell anybody what to do, but like this is a book I think you really want to read on vacation or in a time where you can kind of sit there and hang with it. Because it reads like a novel and you can't even believe this shit happened. And you somehow captured a level of detail in this thing that is absolutely stunning. And
Oh,
so,
you're the man.
so this is like a book that's like worth sitting down and fucking reading. Yeah, I mean,
Thank you. Thank you
especially
for that.
like it's and I'm not, look, I don't know what it's like to be a woman. So, to quote Archie Bunker, don't misconstrue what I'm saying. But like, this is a great dude book. Like Scarface, dudes love Scarface. Like I don't have one friend that doesn't think Scarface is in their top 10 movies. Like it's fucking awesome, right? And so if you're like a dude and you love these dude pirate fuck stories and like it doesn't get, this is the greatest modern pirate story I've heard. It's fantastic. The pirates come from two ends and they take over Miami for like a long time. It's fascinating. Anyways,
Thank you,
Robin, you did a
Christopher. I
great job,
appreciate it.
man. You get a fucking A+.
I'm grateful. Thank you, Christopher. I'm really grateful.
Ton of fun. And thank you so much for your generosity. And listen, whenever you have anything you feel like you want to come back and talk about, then hey, come back.
I will take you up on that. And you come on my show as well. I mean, we hit the what is the word called, like when we get sucked into a black hole, when everybody appears on everybody else's podcast?
Yeah, I don't know. We all Truman show each other into the oblivion
Yeah.
somehow.
Or being John Malkovich, you get spit out of that like turnpike thing in New Jersey. It's a great movie. You should see that too.
I've seen that movie. I love that movie. It's been a long time. Aren't they in that building with those really like short floors and they got to kind
Short
of,
floors. Yeah, yeah.
and is Is Cameron Diaz? Am I remembering this
Oh
right?
yes, a
She's in
very
that movie,
curly-haired
right?
Cameron Diaz. You can't recognize her.
Yeah. No, I'm a very big Cameron Diaz fan. I think she's fantastic in everything.
She's great. Yeah, yeah.
All right, Robin. Well, hey, this has been great. Thank you so much. And
Thank you, sir. Have a great evening. Have a
you
great
too.
week.
Be legendary,
Talk
my
to you.
friend.
Take care.
There it is. That was a fun one. Man, that was a fun one. I hoped you loved that as much as I did. And if you know somebody else who might love this dialogue with Robin, why not email it to them now? And we would love you just a little bit extra if you shared it on social media. Your shares and your reviews make a giant difference to the growth of Legends and Losers, and we appreciate them very much. And, your prana will flow in a good direction when you share and rate the show. Don't forget netsuite.com/legends to set up your free growth dialogue with them, a growth assessment for an hour-long discussion with a growth expert in your industry. All right. We would like to thank the amazing new book by our friend and guest today, Roben Farzad, Hotel Scarface. Pick it up. You will love it. Verve Coffee, the leader in West Coast artisan coffee and the official coffee of Legends and Losers in Santa Cruz, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Tokyo, and always at vervecoffee.com. HarperCollins Instant Classic Play Bigger, How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets. Equity Directory, connecting startups to the talent and resources they need to build legendary businesses. If you're in the startup ecosystem, you want to be on equitydirectory.com. OneLifeFullyLived.org. We're a nonprofit helping you dream, plan, and live your best life. Check us out, OneLifeFullyLived.org. The Ziegler Show, the podcast that inspires your true performance with our good friend, Kevin Miller. Check it out, the Ziegler Show podcast. And speaking of podcasts, this is a new one that we love from our friend Dan Moyle. It's called the Storytellers Network podcast. Check it out wherever you get good podcasts, the Storytellers Network podcast with Dan Moyle. And speaking of Dan Moyle, Interview Valet, podcast interview marketing. If you're a thought leader, get your leading thoughts on some leading podcasts today. Check out interviewvalet.com. And speaking of podcasts we love, the new Jordan Harbinger Show with our friend and guest on episode 135, Jordan Harbinger, and Doctors Without Borders at doctorswithoutborders.org. You make a donation and we make a difference in some of the most challenging places on planet Earth. Now, we must remind you that this oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network, and we would love you just a little bit extra if you'd share the shit out of it. All rights do remain disturbed. We must warn you that this oddcast is clearly produced in a studio that does contain nuts. We'd encourage you to teach kids sports, go on a bike ride. Remember, there's no such thing as a participation award. Don't be lame. Get out of the passing lane. Hey, man, careful. There's a beverage here. The KKK took my baby away. And remember, you got to roll with the punches to get to what's real. Thank you, Dandy Candy. Love you, Mom and Dad. And hey, Colin, this oddcast really ties the room together, doesn't it? And our deepest apologies today go to Marcus Rust, the CEO of Rose Acre Farms. Sorry, Marcus. We just ran out of time for you. That's it, my friends. Thank you so much for investing part of your life with us. We look forward to seeing you again soon on another episode of Legends and Losers.